Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this present TDUK webinar. Mute. So I was just going to say, welcome to this TDUK webinar on the Net Zero Club. We're joined today by Simon Aylesbury, who's head of Energise, who's going to talk us through the software that they can provide for you if you so wish. It will help you, record your emissions and also give you some advice as well. So we're just waiting for people to join. We'll give it a minute or so before we carry on. Hang fire, and we'll just give it a minute or so for everyone to come along, and we'll do proper introductions then. Okay. I think we're just waiting for one or two more people. We'll just see how we go. We'll give it till 3 minutes past, and then we'll make a start. It's 10. Okay, well, I think we'll make a start. Welcome everyone to this TDUK webinar on the Net Zero Club. My name's Charlie Law. I'm Director of Sustainability here at Timber Development UK. Where this session sort of follows on from the launch of our Net Zero Roadmap, which was launched at the beginning of the year, and you can find a copy of that on the TDUK website if you want to download it, which has got a lot of information on where we need to be making reductions and what we need to be measuring as an industry. We're joined today by Simon Aylesbury, who's chief exec of Energise, who were the consultants that helped us put together that or done all the work really on the Net Zero Roadmap for us. And Yasir, also from Energise, who's observing today, just keeping an eye on things from their end and just notes and everything else. But Simon's going to be presenting today on the Net Zero Club, which is a key part of the roadmap, is around how we can better monitor our emissions, as particularly our scope 1 and 2, but also going forward our scope 3 emissions. So Simon's going to explain the Net Zero Club to you, what it's all about, how it works, and the benefits to yourselves as businesses. It's very much aimed at the businesses within our sector, so very much SMEs. So hopefully you enjoy the day, and any questions, if you've got any questions as we go through, there is a Q&A button. If you just ask the questions, I'll monitor them and we'll try and fire them in either at the end or as we go through if we get a point. But yeah, any questions on the club, on the software, or anything about the Net Zero Roadmap, please put that in the Q&A and we'll pick that up at the end. Okay, in the meantime, I'll hand you over to Simon to explain the Net Zero Club and present to you. With you, Simon.
Hi everyone. So just as a starting point, thank you for joining today, and just going to walk you through the Net Zero Club from our end, and I thought I'd just start off by introducing kind of what the key features of it are, and I suppose what the purpose of it. I think fundamentally one of the key findings in the roadmap was that there's an underlying need for kind of operators within the industry to improve their data and kind of be able to take more structured action towards net zero, and ultimately the purpose of the service is to be able to do that. So I'm going to walk you through the software in a moment, but I think it's just important to kind of pull out those key features that are the purpose of why this exists in the first place. So that's why I've popped those on the screen first and foremost. So underlying the purpose of this is to be able to help you develop your carbon footprint, establish a plan, develop your net zero target. If you believe that you want to go down the route of offsetting, how to do that responsibly, and also to provide insights alongside that. And I think it's quite important to bear in mind that the Net Zero Club is a part consultancy, part software service. The service is delivered through an online platform, but you have a consultant who can jump on calls and guide you through that journey. So it's not just a kind of straight software, you've licensed something and there you go kind of thing. It's much more supported than that. So I've just popped the Net Zero Club up on the screen, and I'm going to kind of guide you through the underlying functionality and purpose behind the platform. So what you're seeing here is the landing page that will come up if you as and when you'd log in, and basically what's in front of you is a quick snapshot here of the ability to see current and previous year's emissions, the breakdown by categories, and I'll go through those categories in a moment, a benchmark performance, and then there is a status check down the bottom here, both your status in terms of your journey to net zero and the status of your account in terms of the actions that you have taken within software. So basically it's highlighting where you have or have not completed the step, and the idea is that there are just 7 steps to be able to get to a point where you've got a coherent plan. So I'm going to guide you through that, but I'll just explain a couple of bits of terminology before we work through. We to try and summarize the different categories of where emissions come from, we've got 6 categories that will show throughout the hub, the Net Zero Club platform. And those are referred to as building and industrial emissions. So that'd be the emissions that come from your kind of industrial processes or within the buildings themselves. Business travel and commuting, purchasing and material use. So anything you're buying, materials that supplied, supply chain and logistics. So that's the transportation of moving the purchasing of goods around. Your own transport and fleet. So this is kind of fleet rather than so this would be like scope 1 and 2 emissions from transport and fleet, whereas this would be kind of the business travel, employee commuting piece, and then waste as a category as well. Now you'll see that the system gives you a snapshot of where you're at. So with the dummy data that's in here, this is actually giving us an A to G rating of our carbon footprint data that's in here, and I'll show you how to put that carbon footprint data in a moment. But ultimately it's about kind of the purpose of this is to kind of simplify it down. So in this particular case, what it's saying is the emissions are A, so to kind of in relative terms less than 25% of average. D is an average emission basically, and if you hover over these figures, it will give you what the values that are sitting behind them are in terms of percentages of average. So between 75 and 100%, it gets you a D, and then above that gets you an E, and below that gets you an A, B, or a C. And what you've also got on the left-hand side here is the ability to kind of break down in a pie chart where the emissions are actually coming from. So what I'm going to do now is just walk you through how you would actually potentially use it and just explain the functionality that's here. So we start first and foremost by the fact that there would be a benchmark setup that we've spoken about here. Actually, that would be set up by a consultant with you with a specific approach to that. It kind of basically means we would identify that benchmark with you using the timber roadmap work. So first and foremost, we as part of kind of signing up, we'd set that benchmark up based upon the number of locations, employees that you've got, and it'll just give you a kind of what would be the typical emissions for an operation of your size and nature. To set up the platform, again, a guided service, but just to explain it, we have the ability to then add in a set of locations, emission sources, and carbon records. So basically, if I show you that as an example in here, in this particular occasion, we've got a farm here, just as a dummy site. And attached to that, we can see a whole series of emission sources. So you can see the electricity, you can see the employee commuting record, we can see the waste records. Now, obviously, there's a whole series of records that come down here, and this is kind of about mapping your emission sources against the requirements of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. Now, that can be done a couple of ways. There are generally it would be done supported by a consultant, but there are various kind of tools to help you. So, for example, there is a quick tool in here of help, what emissions do I have? And it will basically ask you some questions and help you establish those and actually kind of guide you through on a question basis. But as I said, generally supported by a consultant to just kind of walk through whether you would or wouldn't have those emissions and make sure that the locations and emission sources are in place. Effectively, you're following these steps that are shown out here on the getting started point. So where you would get to next is to start recording your emissions. Now, that's, if I go into here, we said that we had we're going into to add some carbon, that we said we were looking at any of these. So let's say we were adding an electricity bill, it will hold the records of what that is. And then, for example, if I wanted to put March 2023's utility bill in, then it goes in like this. Now, as I said, generally there's a supported exercise, but it's something where you can add data yourself if you're wanting to expand categories or expand the use of the platform. Generally, we'll enter the data on an annual basis, but if you want to do it more regularly than that, and the platform's fairly easy to use to be able to add it and more detailed than that. It is often the case that people will put scope 1 and 2 data more regularly than annual, but scope 3 is quite commonly done that because at an annual basis, because it's just a bit more effort to compile. So in this case, let's say I just put in the figures. You can see it's calculating the carbon footprint on the fly down here, and then if I was to save that record into the database, it would record that as carbon. If we go back to that getting started journey, what that ultimately means is I can keep working through that journey, and I ultimately end up with a carbon footprint to be able to review. The platform has a whole series of reports that you can review. You've obviously seen the benchmark already. There are a set of reports within the platform that I can click. This is dedicated to the last 12 months, the one I just clicked on. But if I take an example of something, the popular one called the carbon bubbles, this is quite useful. So this is basically all data ever entered in. So this is the full lifetime carbon footprint of this organization. And what I can see here is if I was to say that I wanted to just look at the building and industrial emissions, I can see that in this particular case, refrigerants are clearly playing a really big role. And likewise, if I wanted to look at what my purchasing emissions are, I can see this particular case, I can see computer services, advertising, education are having a big impact on that. Likewise, I can do the same on waste and obviously look at the overall position. It's really useful as a way of being able to take a high-level snapshot of where your emissions are, get an understanding of where your priorities sit, and be able to focus on it. Each of these pieces is you can drill down. So if I was to click into cars and I wanted to see the underlying data, then there is a pop-up that will come up that will allow me to see the underlying records that sit below that, and I can see which time period, which site that records came from, and drill down. And the same can be done up here. You can filter by different categories as you walk through. The whole series of different reports in here. There's a heat map, footprint snapshot, which gives you just the last 12 months. And you can also create reports in a specific format if you wish. So you'll see on the side here, there's a series of report options. So if I needed the report under the greenhouse gas protocol, and I just put, and I wanted to do this on the calendar year 2021, then just pop that in as a record. And if I press submit on that and then click the URL here, it will pull up a carbon footprint formal report that will show me the breakdown of the different records that have been added into the system under the different emissions categories that we've just run through. So the various reporting options, again, kind of can be supported by a consultant, but if you want to kind of run a more formal report, as you can see here, there's a series of options that sit under that. So yeah, a whole series of options, depends what you're really wanting to, but the purpose of why there's a consultant there to guide you. And you can see that this has now changed to saying the step has started, that we've now got a carbon footprint been reviewed because I've created a formal report on that. So I've gone into that report library and set up a formal greenhouse gas report. So obviously, once we've got to a carbon footprint, say we can see the carbon bubbles and we can see where our priorities sit, we then need to start looking at how we're going to reduce that and take action on that. Now, first and foremost on that, there's going to be a series of options that can just be done from knowledge. In fact, at the back of the roadmap, there's an extensive list of actions that an organization can take. And actually, one of the things you can do in here is to manage those actions. Now, in this case, there's a whole series of actions that are not attached to the carbon. These are just ideas that have been popped in separately. But what you can do in here is add a set of opportunities, basically, in sections called reduce and renew. So the idea is reduce is for reducing your existing emissions, and renew is for anything you're changing. So renewables, circular economy, anything where you've got kind of strategic change to the overall setup. And again, consultant will walk through, develop that action plan with you, and actually part of the services will provide you a formal report that can be adopted at a board meeting with what your action plan for net zero is. And that target setting point that I've highlighted in those 5 points at the beginning, that's the outcome that summarizes that is, okay, adopted, kind of here's the proposed target, here's the carbon footprint, here's the action plan, here's the target. And that report becomes kind of the formal outcome that comes from that. But basically, you can use this as for anybody who's familiar with the software called Trello. Basically, you can use this like a Trello board. So you can change the phase in which your opportunity is in. You can add a new opportunity. So let's say I wanted to add a new project to, and there's a whole series of points here that you can record in terms of different pieces of information. You can record the actions that have been taken against that project as you walk through. You can add photos in. You can put what type of activity it is, which emission scopes it will reduce, and track the start and end times of those opportunities to be able to kind of map your pathway to net zero, and effectively track them and use it as a kind of status tracking tool as time progresses. So it can be really super helpful in terms of pushing forward towards net zero and just understanding where have we got new ideas, costed them, planning them, implemented them, or what stage of the journey you're on. So that's the kind of obvious win action plan pieces. But one of the challenges for operators within this sector is that you may need to be able to use a couple of other pieces of functionality that sit within the platform. So it's worth bearing in mind that we do actually have the ability for organizations to send questionnaires to their suppliers. So when you first join the Net Zero Club, there is there's a free letter code that we give to every organization. So for Timber Development UK, it's TDU. And if you were to use the supply chain tool, basically you can ask your suppliers to fill out a questionnaire to be able to provide you their carbon, because that's obviously quite important in terms of some of the carbon footprinting. And so there's a couple of forms that can be filled out that basically allow you to engage suppliers. And as an example, just sharing one on the screen, there's a short form one, which basically is quite quick and easy. So if I was a supplier and I was Acme Limited responding for TDU's request, I can fill that out, and basically there's just 6 quick questions here. The longer form one has a much more detailed, wider sustainability questionnaire, and it has about 35 questions. It's quite detailed and can take a bit of time for people to fill out, but this is a good light touch approach where you're basically asking people for their carbon footprint and for the 6 key questions here about their level of engagement and activity on net zero. When you press submit on that questionnaire, it will attach to the account. I'm not logged into a TDU account now, so I can't show you the direct connection through, but basically if I was to do it straight through to this account, it would pop up as a response here. And basically what you'll then be able to see is the responses from your suppliers. You can obviously see here that you can just click through to review them, and that will then allow you to see the engagement from suppliers and be able to push forward that point as a way of developing further actions to reduce your emissions overall. We do have a basic carbon only life cycle calculator in the platform. It's worth bearing in mind that that's probably not going to be appropriate for people who are trying to produce EPDs and other pieces, because that requires a eutrophication and other calculations. But there is a basic LCA tool that can do the carbon only calculations. Basically, it only has the carbon factors, not the other environmental factors. But as a way of being able to understand the carbon life cycle is somewhat useful in that respect. We talked about the kind of 4th stage before in terms of the bullet points, or 6 in terms of these steps, in terms of the ability to do rebalancing. So basically, this obviously refers to carbon offsets. The platform does have the ability for you to record and actually procure carbon offsets through the platform. It really depends upon your policy to it. There is a set of solutions that can be procured through as kind of existing commercial arrangements that are kind of passed through in terms of access from the relative market. You obviously need to define your own offset strategy. That's something that we would walk through in terms of one of the consultants running through as a session to say, look at which offsets should or should not be able to be purchased based upon the standards. And there's extensive guidance about kind of recommendations about what's appropriate in the back of the TDU, the Timber Development Net Zero Roadmap. So it's just worth bearing that in mind in terms of the way the platform is set up. So ultimately, you kind of the journey you're trying to go on here is kind of, as we refer to it, review, as in understand your carbon footprint, reduce, so identify those opportunities to reduce your emissions, renew, so think about how to change the way you're working, and then rebalance. And the platform's set up to basically guide you through that in those high level steps I've just walked through. So you would basically walk through with a consultant as a first meeting to set up benchmarks, locations, emission sources, gather that carbon footprint data, then do a workshop to review your carbon footprint, go through the benchmark, those reports we've showed, where are your biggest impacts, review the carbon bubbles, maybe pull out a formal GHG report so that you've got one to be able to send to any of your customers who might be asking you for one. Set out that carbon reduction plan, reduce and renew. I mean, a full detailed one of those finished normally has 20, 30 actions that would probably be mapped out on it. There's obviously some tools on here, particularly for that supply chain side, that may be useful to assist you in terms of developing that. And then for any emissions that are left, it really depends upon your approach as to whether you're looking at carbon neutrality along the way or net zero in time, as to what your carbon offset strategy would be. But basically looking at kind of responsible offsetting as an option as well. So underlying kind of hopefully that's a useful 20-minute tour around the platform just to understand the underlying functionality that's within it. Yeah, I think hopefully that's a useful top level walkthrough of the platform.
Okay, thanks for that, Simon. I haven't got any questions at the moment on that, but just wondering if there's a couple of questions that have come up while I've been talking there. Obviously, as you said, the first thing you said is not just a use license. It's obviously you've got consultancy advice included within this as well. What sort of are there any limits around that advice time wise, or is it on the end of the phone? Are there certain points at which the consultant will get involved? Obviously, you mentioned about putting together the action plan, but what are the key stages that the consultancy advice would get involved?
So effectively, it's done around 3 phases of work in terms of the way we guide through that journey. And I guess in terms of the answer around timings on it, our general view is it's about working towards a destination on it. But there is obviously an element where the scope of works is to support developing those outcomes rather than any of the other things we might be able to support. But I think just to explain the journey, typically that will be a data workshop that helps to explore what your carbon footprint records could be, understand what the scope is. For many people, that this is the very beginning of their journey. So the first activity is to map out effectively where your emissions are against the GHG protocol, what data sources actually exist, and how we could go about calculating that and walk that through. The second stage is once that carbon footprint journey, which will generally be then communication between the customer and the point of contact in our team, to do a review of that carbon footprint. Basically, where are the biggest impacts? And as part of that, there'll be some review of a data improvement plan, because there's always an element after you've finished a carbon footprint of highlighting what the obvious areas of improvement are. There'll be places around procurement data. There'll be often places around waste, water that are pretty common places. Transportation distribution in terms of supply chain and logistics data is generally quite poor. We saw that within the roadmap work itself. It's one of the observations that's within the roadmap is that transportation and logistics data is weaker in relative terms. So that would be a kind of an expected outcome. What you then expect is a call, like online call, to be booked to basically evolve from that footprint into a roadmap in terms of so basically it would be a case of, right, okay, our top 10 categories of emissions are these, so we're going to look at what opportunities are viable against those. Now, obviously, some of those, there may be the ability for the consultants to, using the information that's available, the stuff we've worked through in the carbon footprint, to be able to provide some advice about what the costs and benefits of those might be. But that's kind of something where the data is already there and not a completely separate, for example, going and doing a multiple day site visit or anything that's not part of the normal part of it, if that makes sense. It's but if it can be provided as a sensible part of it, that is something that we would support. The ultimate purpose of that kind of initial journey, I guess, is that you're trying to get to a point where you've got the action plan document, which is a critical part of the journey of this, because it summarizes your baseline or current carbon footprint, your current action plan, and where you're at against those, so that we will walk through with you and then go, right, okay, well, how well are you getting on with those actions? What that generally then evolves into is a conversation that is generally some kind of quarterly check-in with each organization, where basically we'll run through that action plan document and support where there are potentially suppliers that people are looking for, in terms of, okay, we want to go and implement that solution, but actually we don't know where the supply chain would be for that, or we're trying to deploy some efficiency in our fleet. Can we just have 20 minutes of a phone call to talk to someone in the team? Now, I mean, as a collective, as an organization, we've got 21 qualified consultants, 14 of those spend their time full-time being a consultant. So there is quite a lot of experience where we can kind of, you can call on a quick question or query that's I guess is helpful in the equation. But the whole idea of this is, in terms of the structure of the journey, and the idea of the Net Zero Club is to, I guess, simplify the journey of it being a completely bespoke exercise. It's trying to take people through a structured set of questions and decisions to get to a point where there is an action plan, there is a carbon footprint, and that actually something is better than nothing in terms of the journey of net zero. It's better to be having a carbon footprint and be on the journey. So those early stages, that data workshop, that carbon footprint review workshop, and that action plan workshop, and critically that action plan document. The fastest I've ever known an organisation go through that entire journey is 6 weeks, which, to be fair to them, is quite impressive in terms of their level of engagement of being able to have the whole of that there. Longest in terms of the Net Zero Club has been probably about 6 months in terms of people getting to a point where they have a full action plan. It really depends upon where your data is at, how engaged you are in that journey, and all those points, which I think are probably fairly self-explanatory in terms of anybody who's interfaced with this topic will know there's quite a lot to it, and it's quite important to make sure that you keep you're open to learning and understanding as you go through the journey. For anybody who's a bit further along the line already has a carbon footprint, the whole journey would be much faster, and you'd be much more into that annual cycle of and quarterly cycle of annual refresh of the full footprint, quarterly review of the progress towards net zero, and discussions about how you can accelerate some of those activities. Some of what would naturally occur is we would sometimes see one customer doing one thing and knowledge sharing to another, or in fact, because this is a sector initiative, you'd expect that there would be updates that would be, this is happening, are you getting involved in it? And that kind of thing as well. So hopefully that's a useful answer about how that consultancy side journey goes alongside the platform.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. That's very comprehensive. There's obviously a lot of consultancy advice that you're providing as part of the service here. That's what I was trying to get at. It's not just expanding upon the bit that it's not just a software licensing. This is very much you working with individual organisations as an individual organisation, bespoke to them, developing those, what their footprint is, what the action plan might look like, and obviously, by the sound of it, always available on the end of the phone if you need a bit of quick advice or quick questions and bits and pieces like that. It's that's really good. So obviously, a lot of companies may not have that in-house sustainability professional there that can answer all those questions for them. So that this sort of advice is going to be very useful to them. So I just wanted to really bring that out. That there's a lot more to it than that.
It's a really it's a really key takeaway from it. I think the underlying point behind why we created the Net Zero Club in the first place is that traditionally consultancy is structured via there being a formal report, maybe a PDF file, Word document, PowerPoint, whatever it is. And our underlying view behind how this should be supported is that the platform should be the central point behind it and the central record that sits behind it, because it then means there's a live record that the customer can use and live in, and then you're not ending up with almost needing to redo sets of analysis, if that makes sense, as you go along the journey. It doesn't take away the consultancy bit. It's that element of almost making it a live experience, if that makes and providing advice as you go along the journey, rather than it being kind of more focused on production of large quantities of reports. The only actual formal report, as in a kind of separate file we will formally send each year, is that action plan document, and there would obviously be notes from the meetings, but that it's about being kind of almost report light but action focused in terms of the underlying approach to it.
And obviously going down through the years, there'll be reviews of that action plan going forward as well on an annual basis, I assume. I know you do quarterly reviews, but there'll be a big annual review and say, right, okay, this is where we've got to over the last year. Do we need to do something with the action plan, change it, and put in new measures now, because we might have done a lot of the ones that we've said we were going to do in that year. We obviously need to go to the next stage.
Absolutely, you'd expect, so effectively alongside the kind of full refresh of the carbon footprint, you expect that the action plan then kind of flows in the same. Sometimes the order switches around, in the sense the carbon footprint is done after the year, but you want the action plan defined before a year starts. That's completely kind of can be agreed in terms of the overall approach, that there is an element where people obviously need to be able to feed this information through to internal decision-making structures. So it's perfectly reasonable to kind of adjust when those activities are discussed. But basically, yes, you would expect a full annual review of the carbon footprint and the action plan, and then there's a quarterly check-in in terms of where progress is at, just to remove any blocks, make any necessary adjustments, move things forward.
Great stuff. Just on the cost side, I mean, do you want to explain some of the costs associated with this? I don't know if we touched on that during the presentation.
Yeah. So it's a starting point, basically, depending on kind of size and nature of organisations, but at a SME level, the starting point is 3,875 per annum in terms of the structure of things. There is a discount structure in place for anybody kind of in the the Timber Development UK structure. We've agreed a discount for the industry as a whole, basically to kind of support the activity and push things forward. It does discount, isn't it? It does scale up beyond the fees overall would scale up if you were into the large organizations element, and there may be elements where it's treated as a more bespoke exercise, but we would still follow the same journey and effectively kind of focused on trying to keep the costs as low as they can be. I guess the clear point there is that even for corporate businesses that might be, I don't know, 500, 600, 700 staff, you'd still expect the figures to be a 4-digit, not 5-digit figure in terms of the journey that we're talking about here. As long as following kind of that club journey. Obviously, anything that goes outside of that, any compliance obligations or other bits and pieces that people might then want to speak to us separately about, those would be independent of this piece. But within the service is that kind of underlying project management journey, carbon footprint, all the reporting that we've just gone through, production of that net zero action plan and the target date, the development of that project list and action plan, access to that curated reputable offset journey, and there are a set of kind of smaller resources that they're about kind of, here's some templates to engage your staff, or here's some templates to how to release a press release if you want to talk about your net zero target date. So there's just things that you would expect if you've got a consultant around to not have to create from scratch. Those templates exist. So pricing wise, yeah, it starts from just short of 4,000 and then scales depending on the size of the organization. But the easiest way to kind of approach that in terms of understanding the detail is either emailing the support@netzeroclub.com email address, which is the dedicated Net Zero Club account one, or as I think is referred to in some of the documentation around the roadmap, the go net zero energise.com email address, which is our Energise overall setup. We are one and the same. Net Zero Club is just a brand, a trading style of Energise. It's basically to just try and create I guess a structured answer for organisations that need something that's a bit less bespoke as a journey.
Great stuff. That's good, Simon. Yeah, and just to clarify there is a discount for, like say, timber industry members that have been part of the organisations that have been part of the Net Zero Roadmap. Of I think it was 15%, so that sort of brings it down to sort of just under £3,300 a year. So quite a good discount there for anyone that wants to get involved. Just on the reporting side, then, Simon, obviously some of the companies will be reporting to various targets, whether that's into us initially. Obviously, there's the automatic transfer of data over to the anonymized data over to the timber industry platform, which I don't know if you want to touch on that and just say how that might work in a second. But also, obviously, outside of that internal reporting structure, I'm assuming the data can be used for any other reporting platform, whether that's Carbon Disclosure Project or Science-Based Targets Initiative or whatever it might be.
Yeah. So I've got to touch base on the timber industry piece first, and I'll talk about the wider one in a moment. So yeah, absolutely right. Anything that comes through this setup will feed through into the aggregated anonymized industry level reporting. So basically we'll support the outcomes of the roadmap overall. So for kind of everybody's general visibility, the overall structure of monitoring the industry as a whole is there'll be a top level set of dashboards that will either be people fed through from the Net Zero Club or ability, kind of a secondary ability for people to disclose where they're not, to feed that data together. in terms of understanding the overall journey for the sector, because whilst it's really important that we've produced the roadmap, it's also pretty critical that the industry understands if it's actually delivering it, and therefore it's really crucial to have that tracking overall, and this initiative supports that. If you're involved in this, you don't need to separately submit, because the data will be picked up in kind of automatically through our back office setup. In terms of disclosures elsewhere, which is, I think, a really important point, you'll have seen earlier that I pulled out an example of greenhouse gas protocol aligned report. There are a set of templates of that form, the most notable being the greenhouse gas protocol format. The whole point of why that's in there is because whether it is responding to CDP, or because you're involved in some other initiative, or you're involved, you're somewhere in a supply chain where somebody's asking you for data under a certain format, then we have the ability to pull those reports out in the different formats there. Obviously, we'll talk through GHG protocol and ISO 14064 related points there. There is the ability to GRI tag the carbon footprint data, or anybody who's reporting under that. That's much more likely to be for large corporates, but if anybody were reporting under the Global Reporting Initiative, there is the ability to tag the data. And the data is in a kind of fairly easy format overall anyway when it comes out in spreadsheets. So if there were any more bespoke way in which the data was going to be used, it's quite likely you could just download the data and produce it for that and any internal reporting. But certainly for those external disclosure points, the platform should be more than adequate to be able to, for people to be able to pull together those external reports.
Great, thanks, Simon. I think that's sort of all the questions from me at the moment. Obviously, you've still got people on the call. If anyone's got a question, I think you can put your hand up and I can unmute you, or type a question in the Q&A. There's none in there at the moment, but if anyone's got any particular bespoke questions for your organisation, more than happy for Simon to answer them now, if you want to put your hand up. No questions at all. Well, I'm hoping we've covered all the points then that we need to cover. Yeah,
I think.
No worries. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Simon. I think that covers it. If there's no questions, obviously people will hang up. Just one another question that's popped into my mind while we're talking. We sort of touched on the environmental product declarations element there, that obviously you've got the carbon information. This will pull the carbon information out that you need for your environmental product declaration if you're producing that as well. Just a little questionnaire. We have got a little bit of a questionnaire online just for people on the call here, that Timber Development UK is looking at an EPD piece of software as well, so one-click LCA. If you look on the website, look on the news items, a little questionnaire on there around one-click LCA and how that's how we might be able to incorporate that into the services of TDUK. But we do need to know from you whether you want to use it or not. If we don't get anyone saying they want to use it, it's not really worth us purchasing the software. So we need to know if people are actually going to use that or not. So we'd encourage you to go on the website and fill out that questionnaire to see if there's anything to inform our decision-making process on whether we go for that piece of software or not. And like I say, all the data gathering that we're getting through this platform, or if not this, through the other Excel spreadsheets that Simon's produced and sent over to us, we can use that data to produce that EPD going forward. Okay, well, if there's, let's say, last chance for any questions.
Liberty Greenish has just added in a question about scenario analysis, so just going to respond to that one. So yeah, just a useful point within it. So basically, once we develop that action plan, we will calculate the glide path for the, so basically what happens there is you get your baseline carbon footprint, map the action plan, so you can see, okay, well, we're going to get rid of gas in our buildings over this time frame. So there's things that are almost what we would refer to as bottom-up activities. So they're things where you've made really clear policy decisions internally, and we'd apply those across the carbon footprint to kind of understand what it's going to look like. And then what then happens for the rest of that, if you take, for example, what happens to surface transport in terms of employee commuting or something like that, is it's modeled using a combination of the government's 6 carbon budget and the National Grid's future energy scenarios data. Effectively gives you a year-by-year projection of where your emissions are likely to end up. So within that action plan, you'd have like this is where our emissions are in 2023, this is where they'll be in 2030, this is where they're projected to be in 2040. And that would inform the conversations that you're having around what that action plan involves. So it's quite high level in the sense that it categorizes the emissions categories against a scenario model, but basically if you said, for example, okay, we're looking at how we're reducing our business travel, then that gets modeled as basically as the decarbonisation of surface transport. If you're doing it as purchase of goods, then kind of there's a manufacturing pathway, and so it's high level, but it's useful to guide the action plan. Obviously, we've got data sets about how fast the grid is going to decarbonise, all those other bits and pieces that sit in there. So hopefully that gives a kind of clarity about what that scenario analysis piece looks like. And then there's an additional question about the generic templates on the carbon use that we use for the sea freight cargo. I'd be unsure how to get specific data for that. So yes, in terms of kind of the data collection journey that you would go through for transportation and distribution, effectively the underlying journey you're going on from this point of view. So this is about the corporate kind of carbon footprint side of things. You would be looking at the quantity being moved and the journey that goes on. Ultimately, any transportation and distribution calculation is generally driven by what's referred to as a ton-kilometre calculation. So how many tons, how many kilometres. So there are templates that will allow us to kind of walk through with you and derive that as part of our kind of data collection journey in terms of pulling that together in a separate sense around how that would be calculated for the point you've just touched base on there, Charlie, about life cycle and environmental product declarations. You have to be kind of clear about the distinction between where the scope of one and the other, because product calculations are slightly different from company ones, but basically the company one is easier because it's basically everything you buy and how and the journey it followed. So it's the easier of the two to draw the scope round, I guess. But yes, there are data collection templates in terms of how we would walk through that as part of the Net Zero Club journey. So hopefully, right. Liberty and Genevieve, that's answered your questions.
Very good. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Genevieve. Thanks, Liberty. Okay, any other questions before we finish up? Because I think can't see any hands up. I can't see any more questions coming through. Okay. Last chance. Okay, right, okay. Well, thanks very much for your attendance, everyone. Really appreciate your time today, and thanks again, Simon, and that's it for you coming along today and presenting. I say, if there are any other questions, obviously, if you think of anything as you go through, drop me an email, or you know, I'm sure Energise with the emails that Simon said there's questions there. If you've got any more questions about the Net Zero Club itself, what was the email again, Simon, for Net Zero Club?
It's just support@netzeroclub.com.
There you go. netzeroclub.com if you've got any other questions or want to, you know, any other trials or start using the system, go through to there, and hopefully we'll see some of you using that very soon. So thanks very much for your time, and we'll see you again on our next webinar.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thanks for hosting. Cheers.
Simon, did you want to hang on for a second to